allegations that they are facing relating to alleged irregularities regarding the security tender at the SABC?
Firstly, in their view, there are no irregularities. And secondly, there's certainly not a link between their resignations and the security tender.
I find that hard to believe, Mr. Malaki, given the fact that if we look back, if we talk about the security tender itself, there had been reservations that had been made from the very beginning by some individuals, including some executives that have been fired from the SABC. I'm talking about the former head of procurement at the SABC and the former head of supply chain at the SABC, who have all said that they raised concerns pertaining to some questions that were asked by some of your clients, including Mr. Matata Tsedu and Kanyisile Kweyama, who questioned why the second bidder, basically they questioned why the first bidder, who was preferred, was being questioned and why that person was basically not being given the tender. I mean, should that not have raised the alarm initially?
Well, for the record, there's a whistleblower who says to the chairperson of the interim board that there's something untoward in the relationship between the successful recommended bidder and certain of the staff of the SABC, effectively alleging collusion amongst the employees and the successful bidder. So that's the first point. Second point is that there is tempering of scores, which is an unusual phenomenon in a tender process. And those two concerns, obviously, must, if you're a prudent board member, you will probe so as to ensure that you do not ultimately decide to award a contract to a party who is accused of such serious wrongdoing. So the interactions at board committee, subcommittee level, and at board level were exactly about that. We do have these concerns, they have been raised, and we presented with a very candidate that is the subject matter of serious allegations.
But why the first degree? Are you agreeing with the fact that some of your clients, Kanyisile Kweyama as well as Matata Tsedu, had questioned, according to some documents that have been received by the media, questioned when this the first bidder had been basically recommended by these two individuals who have now since been fired by the SABC, that they questioned why, on the basis of scores, you talk about score tampering, should the process itself, Mr. Malaki, in any given environment, from the very beginning, it seemed to have been dogged by controversy. You had allegations of tampering with scores. You had allegations of those who wanted to remove those who had scored the greater number, if I may. And why not start the process from the beginning? Why didn't they take that decision to start the process from the beginning? Already it had been marred by controversy. Why go ahead with that?
Yes. Well, they couldn't because that meeting of the board took place on 30 June 2017. The incumbent contract was coming to an end on 31 July 2017 and had been extended twice already. The advice from management to the board was that it could not be extended one more time. That would constitute an irregularity, contraventions which would lead to adverse findings by the Auditor General and certainly frowned upon by National Treasury. But let's just go back to the discussions around the board.
But it was National Treasury, Mr. Malachi, sorry to interject, but it was National Treasury, for example, who these two former employees of the SABC, they wrote to National Treasury. The SABC is in possession of that documentation, where National Treasury simply said, you cannot go ahead with this contract. You cannot deviate from the prescribed norms, where if there is a company that has scored the highest in this particular bid, you cannot deviate. No sufficient reasons were given for any deviation pertaining to this. Do you not see that is irregular?
Well, no. Firstly, it is incorrect to say that you may not deviate.
You may, but you've got to give sufficient reasons. You would agree with me.
The procurement legislation says the decision maker has to go with the highest scoring bidder, unless if objective criteria exists to go with somebody else. Now, in this particular case, top of their mind are these allegations against the recommended bidder. And secondly, is concerns around the score changes. It shouldn't happen in the ordinary course of procurement processes. And thirdly, it is that eventually, when the substance of the two bids were considered by the decision makers, there was hardly any difference in the scoring. To give you an example, I mean, the successful bidder was sitting at 99 points and the second bidder at 98.87 points. So the difference was minuscule, and so was the price. But the concern was, we are faced with a guillotine situation where we must decide to award the tender. You've got two possibilities. The one is you could go with the recommended bidder, but what about these allegations that have been made, which on the face of it, if proven to be correct,
but the process should have been stopped at that point, Mr. Malachi.
Hang on. You can't stop a process when you are faced with the potential of creating a definite irregularity.
But all of this could have been avoided, where you have allegations that are made against former members of the interim board of alleged interference, them wanting to interfere in the process. And you rightfully pointed out, as we've all indicated, you're speaking about issues of score tampering. The process was doomed. It seemed doomed at that phase already.
Not at all.
And yet you decide to go ahead with it?
No, the characterization that it was doomed is not correct. There is one bidder who has difficulty. Only that bidder, 3 are recommended, and the one has difficulties. And those difficulties, incidentally, are borne out in the court case that very bidder has brought up against the SABC. If you read their affidavits, they come on oath and they say they know that their price was X amount lower than of the second bidder, and they say that they know that they'd won. How could they possibly have known when the records of the SABC are yet to be produced in that court case? So it bears credence to the concerns that the board members have. And I think it's not correct to characterize what the 2 employees did in those board meetings as they objected. Not at all. A perusal of that record, which we have done in advice to the interim board, reflects that they were diligent in their duties in questioning what was on the face of it problematic areas relating to the successful bidder recommended. And secondly, they sought advice, and that advice is recorded in the board meetings from supply chain management. The very same Mr. Mulauzi says to them, you may decide to go with a second bidder. The head of legal services at the SABC is in the very same meeting, and he says you've got section 21F, which says apply yourselves to the bids before you.
Yeah.
You're not a rubber stamp. You don't have to take what they put before you. You have to apply your mind. And if the high scoring bidder is not the one that you wish to go with, then you have to have objective criteria that you take into account for going with the second or the third bidder. And that's exactly the process that unfolds. Yeah. If you read the board minutes, which we have done, you will see that it was a very robust discussion, and it is not a probing, it is not in any way an intimidation by board members, intimidating members of the management of the SABC. It was in fact those board members saying to themselves, hang on, in the face of these allegations, we need to bring out a microscope.
Yeah. Okay, so you've already said to me just very earlier on in the meeting, in our interview, that the board members, you deny that the board members resigned because of the security debacle.
Well, they themselves have said so. You will have seen their statement over the weekend. If you look at the timeline, all of these events took place early in 2017. And remember, they are the ones that were responsible for the SIU investigation. They're the ones that took the evidence to the SIU and said the president must proclaim that there be an investigation, including the secondary allegations against a successful bidder. Now, it is quite sad that such outstanding citizens must now face the probe. We deny. There's no link whatsoever. The timeline is completely different.
Mr. Tebogo Malachi, who is the legal representative of the interim former board members, of course, Kanyisile Kweyama, as well as Matata Tsedu, of course, Krishnaido, of course, being part of that as well. Him denying that they resigned on the back of the security tender scandal here at SABC News. And of course, breaking news, you also heard there that a 6th individual employee here at the SABC has been suspended because of alleged sexual harassment. Let's take a short break here on the